Government corruption has never been more prevalent or caused more harm. It's why extremism is on the rise. It's why the financial gap between the haves and have-nots has never been wider. And it's why our planet is at risk of an extinction level tragedy. That's why I need your help to keep exposing the truth about the rot on both sides of the aisle. Become a supporter or a friend of the show today by clicking on the coffee link in the description box below. Friends of the show join me on a Zoom hangout once a month, and you guys can ask me any questions you want, and I can get to know you better. But the most important reason to help is to keep the show alive. Together, we can and will save our country and our planet. Thanks in advance and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I have an update to share about one of Trump's Capitol insurrectionists. It's time for an episode of Where Are They Now?
Webster was arrested.
Patrick Montgomery was in court.
Jonathan Manapa will stay in federal custody.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
So 56-year-old New York resident, Marine veteran, and former New York police officer Thomas Webster just received the longest sentence yet for a January 6th defendant. Here's why. Webster took a gun with him to D.C., and he was seen on the Capitol grounds wearing a bulletproof vest. He was carrying a Marine Corps flag. As Webster approached officers standing behind a barricade, he pointed at one of them and he yelled, quote, "You fucking piece of shit, you fucking commie motherfuckers, man. You want to attack Americans? No, fuck that." And quote, "A fucking Marine? You fucking commie fuck. Come on, take your shit off. Take your shit off." So Webster was then seen on body cam footage. He pushed against the bike rack 2 times. That was what they were using as a barricade. And at that point, the officer pushed Webster away and he accidentally struck the side of Webster's face. So then Webster started striking at the officers in a downward chopping motion, they said, with his flagpole. And Webster hit the barricade so hard that it snapped his metal flagpole in half. So the officers fell back. They moved back to avoid being hit. And that allowed Trump's mob to surge forward and breach the barricades. So that's when the officer who was being yelled at tried to wrestle the flagpole away from Webster. But then that officer decided to retreat as well. And then that's when Webster crouched down and then he charged at the officer. He tackled him to the ground. And then while he had him pinned on the ground, the officer said that his gas mask was filling up with tear gas because Webster was trying to pull his gas mask off of him. So he was not only succumbing to the effects of the tear gas, but he was also being choked by the chin strap on his mask. And he was being kicked, he said, by other members of the mob while he was on the ground. And you guys might remember that photo of Webster trying to remove the officer's gas mask. Everyone was calling him the eye gouger because you couldn't see the mask behind his hands. So it looked like he was trying to gouge the officer's eyes out. So anyway, at some point, Webster took off. He headed for the Capitol. The prosecutor said he continued to disobey other officers' commands. But Webster did stop long enough to live stream to social media. And he said, quote, "Send more patriots. We need some help." So following the Capitol attack, Webster texted a friend and he wrote, quote, "All is well in my room. Never forget this date." And then Webster tried to avoid detection and arrest by deleting his January 6 photos from his phone. But he was arrested. He was arrested on February 22nd of last year. He was indicted on charges of assaulting officers with a deadly or dangerous weapon, civil disorder, entering restricted grounds with a deadly or dangerous weapon, disorderly conduct on restricted grounds with a deadly or dangerous weapon, physical violence on restricted grounds with a deadly or dangerous weapon, and physical violence on Capitol grounds. Webster refused a plea deal. He opted instead for a jury trial. Not a smart move. In May of this year, Webster was found guilty on all counts, and he was looking at up to 20 years in prison. So for once, the government requested an actual real penalty. They asked the judge to sentence Webster to over 17 years in prison, 3 years of probation, just over $2,000 in restitution, and then a $100 special assessment for each of his felony convictions. The government argued that because he was a police officer for more than 20 years, he should have known better. They also said he's shown zero remorse for his actions. In fact, at his trial, Webster blamed the officer for his violence. He called him a rogue cop, and he tried to say that everything he did was in self-defense and that the cop was the aggressor. Webster also tried to say that he wasn't trying to remove the officer's mask. He was trying to show him his hands. And then Webster's attorney attacked the officer and said that, he used excessive force. And then he called him a, quote, dishonest, unprofessional police officer. But then in a sentencing memo to the court, Webster's attorney dialed all that back. He then asked for leniency, and he tried to blame his client's actions on his troubled childhood and PTSD from his time as a New York cop. They said that when Webster attacked the officer, he was in the midst of a PTSD flashback to when he was fighting with a suspect. And his attorney completely backpedaled about his insults with the officer. He said that Webster, quote, should have fully appreciated the enormity of the task assigned to Officer Rathbun and his fellow officers. And a psychiatrist wrote a letter on Webster's behalf, and the psychiatrist said that he, quote, wished he had stayed home that day. Bet he does. And that he, quote, understands violence is not acceptable. Really? He had a year and a half to reconsider his actions that day. But being convicted of multiple felonies is what it took for him to understand that he is the problem. So U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta presided over Webster's case. I couldn't find any details about what may have been said in court, but in the end, the judge took into consideration Webster's service to the country, his time as an officer, and he sentenced him to 10 years in prison and 3 years of probation. So 10 years away from his wife and 3 kids, all for a man who literally stole national defense information. For a man who won't lose a second of sleep over what Webster's family is going to experience over the next decade. You know, and 10 years in prison would be tough for anyone, but it's got to be especially difficult for a former cop. I mean, he's probably going to be in lockup for his own protection 23 out of 24 hours a day. Anyway, guys, when and if I hear more, I'll let you know. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Take care, and I'll talk with you soon.